Now let us work with pivot tables. Well, we did work on pivot tables during the basic Excel program, but in this session, we will explore some advanced and cool features associated with pivot tables. So to begin with, we have some data over here that's about the global sales of a company that sells lamps. Now these lamps have been broadly categorized under LEDs, CFL, and FL. When you say FL, that means fluorescent light. Now let us get started and quickly create our first pivot table from this data. I can click anywhere on this table or maybe select the entire range of this table till the last row. It's a large set of data and will be quite an interesting case to work with for our pivot table. We go to Insert menu, select Pivot Table. Now we have the entire range selected. In case if there is any error, you can anytime wipe this out, clear this out, and select again. Now let's click on New Worksheet. OK. And here we have. Now here first I would like to have region and then country as the second row heading. And then we want transaction date as a column heading and then amount and values. Well, that's pretty much done with this. Well, in case if you do not see these transaction dates grouped as months and instead you see it in the form of days, don't worry. Just right click here and click on group. You have the starting and the ending date range. This is generally the upper limit and lower limit picked up by Excel from the data. Now here you can see that it's being grouped by months and then next level by days. Now I do not want it by days, so I can uncheck it by just click on days. It's unchecked. Well, in case if I want quarterly, I can select quarters. If I do not want, I can uncheck it. For now, let's leave it to months. Let's select it, click OK. Now let's do a basic formatting of this data. I would like to see the thousand separator over here. So I have Control Shift exclamation as a keyboard shortcut. But then again, I need to remove the decimals which are not required. Now let us adjust the width of these columns. We select the columns, double click on one of the borders, and here we have them adjusted. Now I see that there are a couple of blank cells over here, which means Indonesia. There was no business or sales in Indonesia, Malaysia, Mongolia, and Philippines in the month of December. Now when it comes to Australia and New Zealand, there is absolutely zero sales in the first 3 months. Probably because the business had just started in the month of October, so that's the reason there weren't any sales. And here in Hungary, no sales in the month of November and December and so on. But it would be better if I could just have a zero in place rather than the blank cells. Now just because the records do not exist for Indonesia for the month of December, they are appearing blank. But I would prefer them to be a zero. So right click on any of the cells, go to Pivot Table Options. Under Layouts and Format tab, we have For Empty Cell Shows. Ensure that this is checked. For Empty Cells Show, I want to show a 0. Well, in case if there isn't any sufficient data, you might also want to show an NA, and that's absolutely fine. But I would prefer to have a 0 in this case, and click OK. Here we have this, all the zeros in place instead of the blank cells. Now, while we're at this, you can also rearrange the rows over here. For example, you have Asia Pacific, India first, and then everything arranged alphabetically here. But what if one of the key regions that you want to focus is also Singapore? So India and then Indonesia, and then you want to have Singapore third. So click on Singapore, move your mouse to the border and drag it up. And you see the entire record moves up. Here, this way we can rearrange it. Now Malaysia, I would have it in the last in the list because now I have it pretty much as the key regions which gave the most amount of business, and Malaysia, I was not able to get that much of business. This is probably to do with the fact that we are still expanding there and exploring the geography. Sooner or later, Malaysia would also start generating revenues for us. Sooner or later, the company will also start generating good revenues from Malaysia as well. Now, here we can arrange alphabetically. By default, everything is arranged alphabetically, but yes, you have the liberty to shuffle the order. Now, let's say they're already in the form of groups. Here you have the region, and under each region, you have the countries. Now, let's say I want to have another grouping over here. That is, I want to club Asia Pacific and Australia into one. So how do I do that? I'll select these two and right click. You can select these and right click and click group. So there is group 1 here. I can change, instead of group 1, I can rename this, but if I'm double clicking, it's collapsing. So it's contracting. So let's keep this as it is. I can anytime change the name from here. I say region 1. Similarly, I would like to have Middle East and Africa as region 2. But now you see, we have Middle East and then North America and then rest of Africa. So there is no way that we can select them and then click group. I select this, I hold down the control key and select Middle East. Now right click and select group, it will. Okay. It did work. So here we have group 2. Now let's say I want to move group 2 up. So I'll move my mouse to the edge and just take it up. After group region 1, I have it over here. And here instead of group 2, I'll call it as region 2. So in this way, we can have multiple levels of grouping as well. And then so we have region 1. Maybe we just want one quick glance on these regions, and then region 2, another quick glance. But when it comes to Europe and Latin America and North America, I would want to have them standing out because there is a different discussion on agenda. So now while we do have one pivot table over here, I would like to also try a different pivot table. And I would like to see how many transactions happened based on the range we specified for the amounts. Let me show you one. For this, first we'll click here and go to insert. I have the region selected, the entire table selected, new worksheet, click OK. And here we have, now this time, I want to have transaction amount as a row heading. But here I do not want this numbers appearing separately, but I want them to appear in group as in a range. So I'll right click on this, select group, and here it says starting at and ending at. So Excel by default picks up the upper limit and the lower limit and by how much. Here, let's say all these amounts are in thousands, right? So let's say I want this to be segregated with a gap of 100,000. Or so I just click OK. Well, in case 100,000 is not a good idea, you can anytime come back and change this to, let's say, 50,000 or 10,000. But let me show you what happens now. If by default, if it is selected to 100,000, I click OK. You see the range? That's the lower limit, 108,882 to 208,881. That's a span of 100,000. And we have the range. Now, I want the amount again in values. And this time, it's the count that it is showing here. That's, I have 143 sales transactions, which were in the range of 108,000 to 108,882 and 208,881. And then we have 36 transactions that falls within the range of 408 to 882 to 508, 881. All right. So that's another interesting way of how you can get your ranges over here. Okay. Now, as you dig deeper, you might also consider having more filters or maybe more rows added, row headings added, maybe region-wise you need it. That's absolutely perfect. Not an issue there. Now, let's come back to our previous worksheet over here. We had everything region-wise, we had the total sales. But let's say I want to create another pivot table and I would have a filter based on product category. So we click here, insert pivot table. I click new. Now this time I want the product category as the filter. So we have this. Now we say country and then the amount. Well, we can also have the region. That's absolutely fine here. That's just before the country. That's perfect. Now I would like to see this in a tabular format. So I go to design menu, report layout, show in tabular form. This looks better. All right. Now if I need the subtotals, I'll leave them as it is. Else I might just want to remove subtotals. That subtotal region. We have this. Okay, I'll just undo this. And here it says count of amount. I don't want the count, but I need the total value. So here under this, I click value field settings. Sum is what I need. Custom name that you want to give. Maybe instead of sum of amount, you might want to give total amount. Click OK. And here we have this. Now here by default you see the sales for all the regions at one place. Let's have it by different dates. So we have transaction date as separate column as well. And we have the transactions for each month separately. Let's select the column headings and just adjust the columns. Yes, here we have. Now considering this, let me just filter this with only CFL. I click CFL, I can only see data for CFL. I'll close this tab. And this data is only for CFL. Now if I were to click on FL, it's only for FL that we have the data. So we see a major chunk of revenue is from LEDs. Now it would be quite inconvenient for us to have manually select each one at a time. How about having them readily done? That means a separate pivot table for each product category. Well, that's very much doable. Okay, and we call it as report filter pages. So for this, first you need to ensure that you have a filter in hand over here. The filter is available. And then you go to pivot table analyze. Under this you have pivot table here, under which you have options. For some of you, you might see the options button over here. Well, in this case, I don't see it. I have to click on pivot table over here, and then we have options. Under options, I would say show report filter pages. Click on this. Now it asks you show all report filter pages of product category because we have our filters by product category. Show all report filter pages. So I click on this, okay. And you see I have a separate worksheet for CFL. I have a separate worksheet for LED as well. And the one sheet 4 that was for FL, which was already selected. In case if I would have selected all, I would have had a separate worksheet for FL as well. Let's try this out again. This time I select all. I remove these two worksheets, CFL and LED. I delete them. We have this product category selected to all. Again, we go to pivot table, options, generate, show report filter pages. Click OK. And here you have one for CFL, one for FL, and one for LED, and then sheet 4, which was for all. That's the macro level view. Now further, whenever you refer to any cell within a pivot table, let's say for example this over here, if I want to refer to this cell anywhere in the workbook, I would say equal and click on this. Now by default, when I click on this, the get pivot data function is initiated, and we can see lot of data over here, the entire reference indicating this particular cell. You hit enter, it does refer. But let's say I do not want to use the get pivot data function. I just want a simple equal to, something like this. If I have this data over here, I put an equal and link to this, and it just shows a simple reference. If I want something like this while referring to a pivot data within the pivot table, I can click on the pivot table and we have pivot table analyze. Under pivot table, we have options, and under options, we have generate pivot data. This can be unchecked. The moment you uncheck it, now you press equal and select this. You see, it's a proper reference that comes up. Now at times you might not want to adjust you might not want the column width to adjust automatically depending on the data width. Let's say here I want them to shrink, and this looks sensible, maybe slightly bigger, and yes, this looks appropriate. Now come what may, every time there is change in data or the pivot table is refreshed, I do not want these columns to automatically adjust, because if I were to right click and refresh, they automatically adjust it. I don't want that to happen. So first I'll set the column width. Let's say this appears fine. Now I'll just right click on the pivot table, anywhere on the pivot table, go to pivot table options. Under layout and formats, we have auto fit column width on update. I uncheck this and click OK. Now this time if I refresh, nothing would happen. The data might change, but the column width would not change. Now let us explore some interesting tools associated with pivot tables. We have the slicers and the timeline. Firstly, what is a slicer? If I click on this pivot table, we have pivot table analyze and we have insert slicer. Now the slicer is just like a visual filter, okay? And with this, we can have multiple levels of filters on multiple columns. For example, this is the data that we have, and let's say I want, during my presentation with my client, I would like to dynamically have filters at different levels. So I say region and country, and then I have something else, transaction date, and click OK. So here we have 3 slicers. And let me show you how this works. This is as good as visual filters, like I mentioned earlier. So first things first, let me just shrink this for a moment. And yes, here we have some space, all on one screen. Now first we have regions, all the regions covered here, and then we have the list of countries. And here we have the transaction date. Since we have data from July to December, these are highlighted, but we do not have anything from Jan to June. So we leave this, and let's say I want data only for Asia Pacific. Asia Pacific. So I click on Asia Pacific, and here we have the data. And you see, it has a cascading effect on other parts of the slicers as well. For example, in countries, we have only those countries that belong to Asia Pacific region, and the rest of them are not selected because they do not belong to this region. However, if I need more than one region, I can also click on Europe, as well as hold down the Control key and click Asia Pacific. And now we have Asia Pacific and Europe. And we have all the countries that belong to these 2 regions, but not the rest, like Latin America, Middle East, Africa, North America. None of them are highlighted here. Now, in case if I want the data only for the last 3 months, I can just select the last 3 months like this with a drag, or I can just select any 1 month, hold down the Control, and select as many I need. So we have the data here, October, November, December. So this is like a visual filter that the slicers help you with. Let me get the data all again in one place. And Let's have all the records. Here I hold down the shift key and select all of them. And again, we have all the records selected, and based on which you have the pivot table here. That's quite a lengthy one. And this is all about the slicers. You can have filters for as many columns that you need. We have region, country, transaction date. Maybe you might want to have some more slicers. Then you can, let me pin this. You can click on insert slicer and have some more as well. Maybe by product category. Click OK. And I want just for FL or LED or LED and FL. We have that, right? So in case if you want to clear the filter, you can just click on this and clear filter. Well, in case if you want to remove any kind of slicer, you can just click on that slicer and delete, and it's gone. Moving on, let us also check or understand the timeline. Here, I'll bring this down over here, keep them separate for now, and let me introduce you to the timeline bar here. Now, I click on the pivot table again. We have pivot table analyze and insert timeline. Now, this feature has been available since Microsoft Office 2016. So we click on this. Now, the timeline feature would work if you have some dates in your data. Since all our data over here in sheet 1 have dates, and this is the reason why the timeline feature is available to us now. So you put a check mark here, click OK. And here we have a timeline bar. You can expand this and adjust the length. By default, Jan, Feb, March, April, May, June, all the way till December is selected, but we know that there is no data from Jan to June. Let's click on July. So here we have the data only for the month of July. Now let's click on June and nothing found. What if I want to select the 3 months at a shot? That's July, August, September. Here we have this, July, August, September. Now what about October, November? Here we have October, November and October, November, December, all three selected. So timeline helps make your presentation look more robust. It's an interesting visual filter again over here. You can just adjust this, and depending on the flow of your discussion when you're presenting it, you might just want to click on any of the region or that timeline and you can get the desired data. Well, in case if you want to format it or maybe beautify it, I would say you have different options here. Light, dark. Let's say I want this. Well, here we have. In case if you're not happy, we can have a dark blue or a dark green and so on. There are a lot many options available here. And same way, when you click on slicer, you do have some similar options in slicers. The way how you want this to be. Let's say I click on this. Red. Here the first one is in red. The second one I would make say yellow. And third one in green. Now yellow is quite bright over here, so I might make this blue. Yes, here we have slicers of different colors as well.